Hi, everyone. At least the previous one point out a few things here and there. So it's Fountain House because it's like on the Fontanka River. Fontanka River because it used to feed the fountains of Peter's summer garden. It's one of the oldest buildings in the city, contemporary to the times of Peter the Great himself. It was given to Sheremetev family, and Sheremetevs, it's one of the oldest dynasties. Its lineage, it's basically its ancestry can be traced up to 15th century, the way we know them. So they already had a noble status at least as early as the 15th century. But obviously, when it gets to Peter the Great, it's about Boris Sheremetev, who was his one of the most loyal companions and friends. Originally, um, he he was just one of the aristocrats in Moscow, which didn't exactly mean that Peter would choose him or would trust him, but it just happened so that they clicked and he supported every initiative of Peter the Great, however easy it seemed to everyone else. He was always the game, let's put it this way. But Boris Sheremetev never really lived in St. Petersburg. Well, he built a house. Obviously, it looked a little different from what it is nowadays, but it was his son, Nikolai Sheremetev, that moved for good from Moscow to St. Petersburg because he had to flee from the Moscow court, Moscow, very traditional conservative society, because he married his own former serf. Um, yeah, I shared with you the story. It's very much like in Pretty Woman. Well, however, she wasn't really a working girl, Praskovia Zhemchugova, but she was his serf. He played in his home theater. She was an opera singer, especially incredibly talented. She was like a celebrity. Um, it's given me a little bit of really a mixed bag of feelings because she was a celebrity. Whenever any celebrity, any high profile guest visited Moscow or St. Petersburg, they absolutely had to go and check out the theater of Sheremetev, and there absolutely was Praskovia Zhemchugova was the star of the show, but she was a servant. So she never really enjoyed, well, I mean, she did enjoy the glory, but she didn't exactly live like a Hollywood star. No. But eventually, well, after about a decade of just having to wait for the Tsar, for the monarchs, for the Romanovs to allow them to get married, and we are talking here early 1800s. So eventually, they got married, and eventually, their son Dmitri was born, and he continued the, I would say, the good deeds of his father. The good deeds, by good deeds, I mean obviously not liberating Serbs, but amassing a big art collection, throwing concerts in their palace, and starting from Nikolai, his father, and throughout and up until basically the revolution, Sheremetev Palace one of the most popular and highly visited concert venues in St. Petersburg. But it also happened, uh, because of this glory as, one of the concert venues, and because Sheremetev family was known for for their passion for collecting artworks, musical instruments, and what not. It eventually eventually after many years, it became the musical instruments museum. I'm kind of really skipping some periods because I don't want to repeat myself, but we have been to this room before. But this is important because in the previous two episodes, we mostly just covered the interiors of the Sheremetev Palace. We spoke about the family itself, but it's more than just that. So Sheremetevs were one of the oldest dynasties, highly respected and always close to the Romanovs. So obviously, it only makes sense that it would be exactly in the Sheremetev's Music Museum that the Romanov musical instruments collection would be housed. But it's actually not a simple story. The thing is that um, the first museum of musical instruments did not open in this palace. The first museum opened at the turn of the 20th century, and it started basically as a it started with the court choir, and in the court choir was given a building. By the way, we are in the stucco room, and this is the photograph of what the room looked like in, let's say, early 1900s, around that time. And Sheremetevs, Ronnie, what are you doing? What exactly are you doing? I'm not sure. Um, and it started as just, well, a royal choir. Ronnie, don't misbehave. I'm not sure what's going on. This is the thing that I don't really have any control of that. Okay, I'm going to reload, reshare the video because, yeah, wait a second. Yes, so as I was talking, it was just a royal, it was just a court choir. And the court choir was given a concert venue because originally, let's say the court choir had been created a long time ago. In this room, for example, you can see portraits of the Romanovs. So during the Sheremetev's times, this room on its walls, all covered in stucco moldings, as you can see now, it had the portraits of the Romanovs all way long. Obviously, things have changed now, but since then, well, we have at least the portrait of Catherine the Great. However, it's not the original portrait from the Sheremetev's collection. Sheremetev collection was, just give me a second. Sheremetev collection was completely expropriated, nationalized by the Bolsheviks, and then dispersed among different museums. Some of the gems of the collections were sold abroad by the Bolsheviks, by the Bolshevik government. So we don't really have Sheremetev's artwork collection. Let's put it this way. But you can find them in different museums across the country. But then Emperor Alexander III, we're talking here let's say, third quarter of the 19th century. Alexander III, last quarter of the 19th century, he ordered that the court choir would not only be performing just for the court and wouldn't only be performing at official celebrations or, let's say, when greeting diplomatic delegations. But from then on, the court choir could also perform on different commercial occasions and also abroad. It could tour around the country and abroad. So it was given a much bigger exposure, and the court choir was given a bigger building where the Kapellmeister, or basically the chief conductor, Konstantin Stackelberg, it was just his initiative to open a small museum, a small room that contained some rare exhibits, some old musical instruments, some artifacts related to the activity and work of the court choir. And little by little, the Romanovs obviously hailed this initiative. They absolutely embraced this initiative because for them it meant well, how shall I put it? It's not like it meant a lot for them, but it meant that the choir was developed and reached, a certain level, it eventually became one of the most popular choirs in the entire empire. And whenever eventually anyone could visit the concert, they sold tickets, and it would be constantly a sold out. Obviously, the interest towards the museum of the court choir rose gradually, and eventually it became a fully fledged museum. However, originally it was located not in the Sheremetev Palace, but a little further down from the downtown, and we see the photograph. So the court choir eventually, well, let's say at a certain period, it numbered 230 people. Just imagine that. So it's a choir, it's an orchestra, and this photograph of the choir and the orchestra just right next to their headquarters. And this is the room of their museum. We are talking early 1900s. There are some photographs, musical instruments, just different attributes of the life of the choir and its activity. Their instruments were there on display as well. On the wall, you can see the portrait of Alexander III, because it was him who absolutely welcomed the idea of establishing the museum. And also, eventually, it would be his collection of musical instruments that would become the core of the museum's collection. But it would be much later. Why Alexander III, by the way? Why he just liked this initiative of, court choir and court orchestra, going public and becoming popular and not exclusively royal? That's because Alexander III himself was a very musical man. He had talents for music. He played several musical instruments, mainly wind musical instruments, and he liked to sing as well. And little by little, some items from the Romanovs collection, some musical instruments from the Romanovs would be donated to the museum. For example, on the display in the Sheremetev Museum, well, because eventually the old museum moved elsewhere, then the revolution, then the Soviet times. So only starting from 1970s, the Musical Instrument Museum opened in this palace, in the Sheremetev's Palace. I'm skipping some things because we've spoken about it before, so there's no need to repeat myself. Eventually, the museum has been here for over 50 years. And speaking of the Romanovs, for example, there is a collection of flutes of Alexander III, that emperor who was grandson to Catherine the Great. And also, he is the one who defeated Napoleon. He liked to play flutes. He had quite a collection. And everyone, well, because obviously, well, he was a triumphant, right? Whenever any delegation visited him, or whenever he visited any country, whenever he paid a visit to any country, he would be given the great number of, gifts. And a lot of people, a lot of delegations would give him flutes. And I particularly like the last one, the lower one, made by Claude Laurent, 1809. That's the year when it was made. And it's made, by the way, from rock crystal. And it contains the silver elements and rubies. This is incredible. And by the way, unlike the wooden flutes, which with time, unfortunately, are no longer functional because they just have lost their properties, because it's wood, it deteriorates with time. The rock crystal one is still, it's still playable, and it has quite a different sound, more booming sound, a more clear-cut booming sound, unlike the wooden ones. I guess it's just all because of the material. Then also another emperor donated his collection to the museum, Nicholas I. Nicholas I reigned in the second half of the 19th century. He is the emperor known for construction of railroads and bridges. Him the railroad king, just to differentiate him from any other monarch. So he, for example, donated a collection of oliphants. Basically, it's another wind musical instrument, and they are made, well, oliphant, I think this word really sounds familiar. So they are made from tusks of an elephant. And yes, so what can I say? They are all gifts. Um, Made from ivory. They are gifts from his wife, and they have very detailed, very sophisticated, absolutely sophisticated designs, all around the medieval times and medieval stories. Why? Because it was fashion, historism. This was the period when Europe kind of relived, reapproached, its past, and they were nostalgic about the Middle Ages. And in Russia, uh, this fashion was brought by Nicholas I and his wife because she was German. This is her, Alexandra Fedorovna. We have spoken about her before. One of her favorites would be that every year for her birthday, they would be going to Germany because, of course, she was a German princess, well, a Prussian princess, and they would arrange a tournament, just like in the medieval times when the knights had to fight at the tournament for the heart of a fair lady. So, and as a present, so this oliphant would be given to Nicholas I. I have never heard any of these oliphants in action, but as you probably remember from the previous tours, it's the absolute position, unshakable position of the museum to actually play the musical. It's just a thing that collects dust unless you play it, because musical instruments absolutely have to be played. But I'm not sure if these ones are played. But look just at the craftsmanship. Look at all these details, how meticulously it was all carved in ivory. And yeah, now one of the most remarkable exhibits for me is something that has to do with Peter the Great. Peter spent most of his life fighting, and that great northern war against Sweden to establish Saint Petersburg lasted for 21 years altogether. Well, yeah, Peter spent most of his time in the battlefield. However, he could play several instruments, and there was one that comes not it's we are not 100% sure whether it was his personal military cattle drum or it belonged to one of his soldiers, but we know that it accompanied Peter the Great in several campaigns at least. So military cattle drum, that's pretty much the it that functions just the same way as a drum. However, I think this just, it's all about the name because it was multifunctional. Used as a drum to make signals, to notify the army on things, or to notify an enemy on things, right? Yeah, and obviously volume could be adjusted, and the intensity of the sound could be adjusting, by adjusting the leather on the drum. But it had another function. The leather could be removed, and the cattle could be used as a pot to cook things. Crazy. It's the it's carved. It's probably the name of a the craftsman. It says pipped E.B. We don't know who this person was. It must have been the person who carved everything. And I think this is just a good enough reason to believe that it came from, at least from the surrounding of Peter the Great. We actually have a very special design on it. It is believed to have been carved later, and it actually depicts the scene when Peter the Great was proclaimed an emperor, which happened in 1721. This was the year when the Great Northern War was over. This is the year when Russia was recognized as an empire because new territories were added, and and Peter was given the status of the emperor. Before that, he was referred to as just Tsar. So, and it is believed that it was carved on one of the cattle drums that followed Peter the Great in his campaigns. Well, that's a good enough story. In the previous episodes, we explored the interior, so I think it's a good idea to actually have a look at one more interior, because before we dive into, the musical instruments collection, this Scarlet Room was the one of the studies, one of the rooms of Anna Sheremeteva, Anna Sergeyevna Sheremeteva, who was wife to Dmitry Sheremetev. So she would have been daughter-in-law to Praskovya Zhemchugova, but Praskovya Zhemchugova died shortly after her son Dmitry was born, so she never really knew her daughter-in-law. So Dmitry had his office right next door, and Anna Sergeyevna has her study and the room for ladies in waiting. In this section of the palace. So the Scarlet waiting room, or Scarlet boudoir, because it had different functions throughout the time. So the Scarlet boudoir, it looked like this in one of the illustrations, and now it looks a little less opulent, but it still has the original fireplace made with just amazing craftsmanship. It's all carved in marble. Of course, the best one. Sorry, sorry for that. I'm looking into a way to. I desperately need to turn off the AC, otherwise I might catch a cold, and we don't need that. We can't afford falling ill, especially when you're on vacation. This is the study of Dmitry Sheremetev, and this room was basically adjacent to the boudoir and study of his wife Anna. But his study, unfortunately, didn't survive. But in his room, there is a continuation of the museum, and where actually the collection starts. This room, in this room, you can find a lot of items that belonged to one of the brilliant art collectors in St. Petersburg, Valentina Golod. I spoke about her on the previous tour because in several rooms of the museums, as you remember, Sheremetev's artwork collection hasn't survived, but the museum has, exhibits quite a number of artworks. So the artworks and some of the furniture come from the collection of the Golod family. And we saw several rooms with the items from that collection that belonged to Valentina Golod and were donated to the museum after she passed away. So this woman came from a former aristocratic family, and we have no idea how she survived the Soviet period, but she basically lived in a museum. This is her malachite collection. This is 1800, early 1800s, by the way. Some artworks from her collection. And some of the items from Golov's collection can be found in the Hermitage, by the way. And speaking of the Hermitage, after the museum closed, I mean, the old Museum of Musical Instruments, the Museum of the Court Choir, closed in the early 1900s. For some time, it was housed at the Hermitage, just in case. So there is close connection between the Romanovs, the Hermitage, and the Sheremetev Palace. So the next room was supposed to be the study of Dmitry Sheremetev, but instead it's the collection of the musical instruments of Baroque period. Why Baroque? The thing is that before Dmitry Sheremetev was born, his mother, Praskovya Zhemchugova, former servant, she, well, as I said, their house was always full of guests. They always had amazing concerts, performances. So that room happened to be one of the rooms where the gatherings were held, where the small home concerts were held, and because of that story of that room, and because of the memories that were connected to Emperor Paul. So Emperor Paul was once invited to, well, I think not once, but one day, Emperor Paul, who was son of Catherine the Great, we're talking the turn of the 19th century. Paul was invited to the concert, and he was absolutely mesmerized with the voice of Praskovya Zhemchugova. And the idea was well, obviously they invited Paul for some reason. Well, they had to invite the monarch, of course, but Nikolai Sheremetev, was desperate. He needed the Romanovs to let him marry his former serf. But Paul was not really forthcoming. He wasn't really agreeing to do that. So the intention was to show Paul how talented Praskovya was and how special he was. Well, he fell in love with her art. He was completely sold, but it would only be his son, Emperor Alexander, the one who would further on defeat Napoleon. It would only be his son who would eventually let Sheremetev and Praskovya Zhemchugova get married. Well, here we have the museums of the Baroque period because this was the trend back in the days when Praskovya Zhemchugova was way. And here we have instruments that used to be played by that royal choir in the very, very first years. There are a lot of string instruments here, but not only that. And we're talking about, let's say, 1800s. And remember, in the previous episode, we spoke about the cello that was given to Nicholas II. I will quickly remind you about that in a minute, but Nicholas II also donated some of his musical instruments to the museum, which happened in 1900s. I'm not really sure which year it was. Basically, almost every Romanov donated some instruments to the museum. And Nicholas II, not only he donated his collection, well, not everything, obviously, but some of the exhibits. He also purchased the collection of Caesar Charles Schnock, I hope I pronounced his name right, who was a Belgian lawyer and avid collector of musical instruments. He played gazillions of instruments himself. He was especially talented. It was just his hobby. I found this photo just by chance, and I find it absolutely incredible. So Nicholas II also purchased a collection of Caesar Schnock that was put up for sale after his death. And thanks to that purchase, the museum now has quite a collection of stringed instruments that were produced earlier in 1700s, in 1600s, which is incredible, I believe. Yelizaveta Alexeyevna, she was wife to Emperor Alexander I. And when Alexander I passed away, some of the instruments were also donated. Some of the instruments that belonged to Alexander I were also donated to the museum. Especially this harp. She gave this harp to, well, it was after she passed away, this harp was given to the museum. She played this harp multiple times. It was her favorite harp. The Romanovs believe that she would have wanted to donate it to the museum anyway, as she had donated so much from her late husband's collection. So I truly agree. Why not? A beautiful, nicely decorated, actually 18th century harp in a good condition. Beautiful decoration, really subtle, and still in a very still. Sorry. This is probably my favorite instrument. It's called it's manual harpsichord. It's not a piano. It's quite confusing, but it's not a piano. It's a harpsichord, and this harpsichord was found in the rooms of Nicholas II in the Winter Palace after the storm of the Bolsheviks. Well, in October 1917, the Winter Palace was stormed by the Bolsheviks. This marked the of the empire by the Bolsheviks. There was discovered this a curiously looking musical instrument that looks like a piano with 3 keyboards, but it's not a piano. We don't know if Nicholas II played this instrument, but he could play piano. He never really played any cello or violin, but he could play a piano. And it seems really likely that he played this harpsichord. However, they are very different from each other. In piano, the music is produced by a hammer, right, that hits the string. But in a harpsichord, the string is not hit with a hammer, it's plucked. So actually, harpsichord, harp, a plucked instrument, and the same idea, it's just plucked. And because it's not hammered, because in piano, the intensity, or like how strong or how lightly you hit the key and it hits string, it makes the sound stronger, louder, or quieter. With harpsichord, you cannot achieve that. Harpsichord has very even sounding, but you can add different keyboards to add the intensity, and different shades, different different kinds of the of the sound. So that's why it has 3 keys, and it's looking gorgeous. I think it looks just perfect, and it suits perfectly the interiors of the Winter Palace. It's it looks just I would say it looks too royal, to be honest. So I'm absolutely sure that Nicholas II could play it, or it could be his wife that could play it, but we don't know that. But we know that it can still be played, and on the website of the museum, you can listen to how the manual harpsichord of allegedly, Nicholas II sounds. So this was the sonnet number one by Rutini. That's what it says on the website. And I have never seen and I've never heard of any concert with this harpsichord playing, but it's likely that they just recorded it for the website. I think that's exactly what happened. And so, as I said, speaking of Nicholas II, he played the piano, but he had quite a collection. He was given a lot of presents. For some reason, it was a good tradition. I don't know, it was pretty widespread diplomatic presence as well. Maybe because of that cello, I just like this light installation, music of Baroque period. We're talking 1700s, right, 18th century. Yeah, that's um, true. We have the musical instruments of the royal choir and the royal orchestra. This is the photograph of the royal orchestra, just, part of it. As I said, at some point, the orchestra and the choir altogether numbered 230 to 150 people. So obviously not all of them are there in the picture. And this is the photograph of 19 of early 1900s. They are dressed just like, back in the times before Peter the Great. Now, it was a tradition that was set hundreds of years ago, that the, official coronation ceremonies, official celebrations were supposed to be held in Moscow, and was supposed to be, and, Moscow, it was all about the times before Peter the Great. And it was supposed to be done in a, in a kind of an old Russian way. So there we go. This is the photograph that you can find on the display. So when I was on a tour in the museum, we were told that you could see how many identical instruments were there, but every instrument on every instrument there was etched the name of a musician that played it. So you can see they're very similar. And just like the way they are arranged, it looks quite impressive. But they actually belong to someone. They could probably tell some stories, all these musical instruments. But just by looking at this instrument, at the number of these instruments, you can just see how massive how big the royal choir and the orchestra were. Um, so speaking of this wind instruments, they were uh, they were used in the official marches. They were used by the army, and remember I mentioned Alexander the Third and his music. So he not only did he love music, he liked to play music, to make music, and he could play several instruments, and he continued doing that his actually up until his death. This is him while he was just still a grand duke, and he just uh, played at some official event related to the army that was before the times, the museum of the royal was arranged, and this was the times when the royal choir, your royal orchestra, only played at the official, diplomatic events or military events. Remember the cello of Nicholas II, right? So I will quickly remind you the story. So it was given to the museum by Nicholas II, and it was given to him as a recognition of his contribution to, let's say, the world peace. This is the Hague Palace, remember? Well, the peace conference that was held in 1899 in The Hague, it was all, this is me by the Peace Palace, it was all the initiative of Nicholas II. He called for the heads of European countries to uh, to disarm and to stop this arms race because he saw where the world was going to. So we're talking about the First World War. And because it was his initiative in the Peace Palace now in The Hague, there is still, you can still find the portrait of Nicholas II. It's still there. I haven't been to the palace myself. I just never really had time, but it is possible to visit it. So that cello created as a present to Nicholas II by actually a prominent cello and violin maker, Albert Jacot, coming from the dynasty of musical instrument makers. It was his father made cellos, Albert Jacot made cellos, and Albert Jacot created the cello for Nicholas II. And at the World Exposition in Paris in 1900, I absolutely love this poster. It must have been just an incredible event. Must have been. I'm truly mesmerized. And this is also this footage is taken from the website of the museum because I don't have this close-up video. So it is exhibited in this room. It used to be exhibited in a different room, but now it's part of the collection in these halls. So it was given to one of the representatives of the Russian delegation as a present to by Albert Jacot himself. I hope I pronounced his name right. And I don't know whether Albert Jacot knew if Nicholas II could play a cello or he didn't know that, but Nicholas could not. But he accepted the present and absolutely loved it. Look at the lower plate. Sorry, just look at that. And here it has a crown. It has the letter N. By the way, both in in Cyrillic alphabet and in the Latin alphabet, which stands for Nicholas. So it was done just as a recognition of the contribution of Nicholas II um, to the peace in the world. And on the website, so if you go to the website of the museum, you can find a short video, and also you could listen to how this cello sounds. Let's do that. I forgot to tell you, I should have told you a little earlier, but you might want to turn down the volume because it's absolutely impossible for me to have any control of that. So it might be a little too loud at the beginning, but I'm sure you will figure out what to do with this. I only heard this cello for the first time as I was preparing for this video, because I only saw it in the exhibition. We were told about it, but I actually, couldn't imagine how it sounds. I doubt Nicholas II ever played it, but he accepted the present and then he donated it to the museum. One could say it was just a nice way, a noble way of discarding the musical instrument he didn't need, but I think it was just a noble gesture. Such a beautiful instrument, never really played before, most likely. And now it's, one of the gems of the collection. What can I say? It was a waltz by Verzbilovich, just in case. So, yeah. By the way, the royal choir also, the Russian imperial choir also performed at this World Exposition in 1900, and there was something special at at World Expo because Nicholas II, that was also present there, he saw a piano, a double piano. And he absolutely loved the way it sounded. Nicholas played the piano himself, and his wife, Alix, also played it. And they loved concerts and they liked, duos, they liked playing together. But, pianos take so much place, right? Take so much space. So, it was not having several pianos in one room. And, it wasn't just Nicholas II, but, the people in general kind of expressed their wish to purchase, double pianos if they were around. And eventually, one French manufacturer started making these pianos. They are big, but it's one piano, it's not two. So when Nicholas saw it in France, he absolutely had to buy it, and he bought it. This is also the video from the museum. I have never seen this piano myself. So on the website, you could just see a short clip of what exhibits look like, how they are all arranged. This is a really good video, good quality video, and I wouldn't have filmed it, myself. It's not really on display, and it is the only double piano that exists in Russia. And altogether, we were told at the museum, by the museum, that there are six of them still around the world, because in the end, it just turned out to be too expensive and too time consuming to buy, well, just to make, and eventually not that many people bought it. So it had to be commissioned, it had to be, prepaid. It was really, really expensive, really pricey. But Nicholas II, price didn't matter to him. So he purchased it, and it used to stay in the Hermitage, in the Winter Palace, which later on became the Hermitage Museum, for, well, actually, up until it was moved to the collection of the Sheremetev Palace. And at the website, well, on the website of the museum, there is a video, and I would like to play it to you. So in this video, there are two musicians, two ladies that are playing this piano, and they are playing a music piece by Alexander Griboyedov, who was a poet, an ambassador, Russian ambassador to Iran, and he also happened to live for some time in Georgia, and he married a Georgian woman, Nino Chevchevadze. So this is how everything kind of comes together, and we have it all connected, right? So Saint Petersburg, Georgia, and Griboyedov, whose grave, by the way, was sold. I just screen recorded it from the website of the museum. So we are going to listen to how this double-sided piano works and how it sounds. Not too loud, by the way, but just good enough for small salons. Oh, and let's see the make. I'm not sure we have it. Player, I think. So Paris. It just looks like two pianos, put together. However, because of its size and because there were two keyboards and two sets of strings and hammers, it wasn't really that loud. Well, it was good enough for small, salons, but it's not good enough for bigger concerts. Maybe that's why it's not really, used that often. It's a waltz, by the way, and I'm sure you have heard this melody before. Okay, I think this is where we're going to wrap this up. So I think it was actually a good idea to use the video that is available, for public, because there's no way, we could have been given, this exclusive access to film close up the piano that belonged to Nicholas II and, some other instruments. So I think it's, well, if you're talking about the Museum of Musical Instruments, I mean, it would be so stupid, not to listen to some music at least, or to just, if there is at least a chance to hear how a 19th century harpsichord sounds. Well, we absolutely have to jump on this. So the chat is open. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm just about to fall asleep, to be honest. We had a very early start, and well, I traveled to Batumi. Thank you, Marilyn. So now, okay, this is it. I'm happy that that it all worked and that we had not really a bad connection. Just a couple of times I got notification that my connection was not stable, but I think altogether it was okay. Let me know if if the sound was more or less okay and if the connectivity was more or less stable. That would really help me a lot. And also, I'm going to share with you. So, Ronnie, that's okay. That's okay. I need to figure out how not to let this happen, but I have not been able to do that yet. I'm going to share with you the links as usual. So here we have my website, you know where to find the information. So tomorrow, again, just once again, I would like to tell you just that um, I'm doing less tours these days, but it's not because I'm on vacation, but that's because I'm doing a lot of, private virtual tours for different companies that I work for. And I'm just kind of trying to manage the time wisely. So there are going to be some tours, just not at the weekend, but during, during the week. So tomorrow, the usual time, I'm taking you to Jerusalem. And then on Monday, I'm taking you to Batumi. So it's going to be a different tour, places that we haven't seen in Batumi yet. It's going to be a live walk on YouTube for my audience. And then on the 5th of August, I think it's Wednesday, it should be Wednesday, I'm inviting you to a concert in the garden. Hopefully it all works fine and we'll be able to put it together. So Emma, Misha is going to be singing, Grisha is going to be announcing the songs and, helping us out. And I will be singing as well because you just bombarded me with messages, asking if I'm going to be singing and why I didn't sing last week. I'm not a singer. I used to sing one time ago, but I don't do it now. Maybe I should, but I don't know. So, and some tours for the upcoming weekend are also there. Thank you, Dorley. Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Yes, I'm glad that you have enjoyed the tour. I'm glad that you have enjoyed how the musical instruments sound. I think they sound lovely. And it's just also one of the testaments of the times, Thank you so much for joining me. And as you know, I would appreciate your support. You can send me a PayPal donation. Dolly, thank you so much for the tips. You could buy me a coffee. I appreciate that. Thank you for supporting me. And I'll see you tomorrow. And on Monday and on Wednesday. And I'll be keeping you posted about the upcoming week because it's going to be very special too. But I'll keep you posted about it. I haven't scheduled it yet. I'm just sorting some things out, but I'm on it.